how did the brain become conscious? And how does the brain dream? We know nothing, nothing at all about the answers to those questions. And so we quietly accept that we don't know it. And then we go and see, well, what can we study? Dreams and actually consciousness in general are things that we can't get our claws into. We can't figure out how to talk about them. I sometimes tell students to their amazement that there are no scientific studies that have demonstrated that humans are conscious.
When you dream, are your eyes closed?
Yes.
So how then do you see your dreams if your eyes closed?
Right. And when we dream, what the brain is doing is it's looking for answers in places that we would not normally look. So technically what we say is the brain looks for weak associations, strengthen the physical connections in the brain. We have pretty clear evidence that 3 Nobel Prizes in the sciences were based on revelation, on dreams. So the periodic chart of the elements, that came in a dream. The discovery of chemical transmission of information between nerve cells. The experiment to prove that actually came to someone in a dream. And the discovery of the ring shape of the benzene molecule, that 6 carbon rings that are joined to each other in a circle, in a ring, came from a dream.
Hi, I'm Yazan and this is Parallax, Inside Creative Minds. Every night and for hours, we go to a private and one of the strangest realms. We go to sleep and dream. But even today, we still don't know what dreams fully are. How are they generated and what do they really mean? Today, I'm speaking with Robert Stickgold, Bob. Robert is a sleep and dream researcher and a professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. His lab studies sleep, memory, learning, emotion, and dreaming, and how sleep changes the way the brain processes experience. Robert originally trained in biochemistry, then moved into cognitive neuroscience and sleep research, bringing a rigorous experimental mindset to questions that had often been treated as too slippery to study. This conversation is anchored around his book When Brains Dream, Exploring the Science and Mystery of Sleep, co-written with Antonio Zadra and published in 2021. Stephen LaBrage says When Brain Dreams unveils a novel neuroscientific comprising an elegant and surprising piece of the puzzle of why we dream. Matthew Walker said, the book provides a truly comprehensive, scientifically rigorous, and utterly fascinating account of when, how, and why we dream. In this conversation, we trace a path from early dream theories to modern sleep science, touching on REM sleep, the activation synthesis model, why defining a dream is still so hard today, and how researchers try to study dreams experimentally. We also explore Stickgold and Zadra's own contribution and model NEXTUP Framework, which means network exploration to understand possibilities, and what it suggests about dreaming, weak associations, and meaning making. And we end up in one of my favorite topics, which is creativity, touching on creative people inside dreams and hypnagogic state, sleep on set, and many, many more ideas. So here's my conversation with Bob Robert Stickgold, and I hope you would enjoy it as much as I enjoyed talking to him.
We are a way for the cosmos to know itself.
This is Parallax, conversations and interviews by me, Yazan. I talk with academics, scientists, thinkers, and all creatives, and I'm here to listen, ask questions, and learn from their insights.
Drawn by the music of cosmic harmonies, it can take us anywhere in space and time.
To better understand how the world works. Dr. Robert Stickgold, thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. So if you don't mind, I'm gonna try to make a little arc. If I succeed, maybe you help me. You're a great communicator. We're gonna start perhaps from your origin, your relationship story to dreams as a cognitive neuroscientist, then move slowly, as you propose in your book, through the history of dreams and all that fascination, then to why we dream, which you have great answers to. I guess you propose maybe six different answers and you examine them. And then we move to the next stop, your own model, your contribution with Antonio Zadra. And then we move to creativity, which I'm also excited to talk about. First, let me just say congratulations on the book. It's really astonishing book. I mean, I was thinking this should be almost illegal because how good the book is. I mean, the clarity of the book, the research, the science of it, but also the examples. Such a joy to read it.
Well, thank you very much. The two compliments I get that I like the most are one, I enjoyed reading it, which for a science book, you often feel like I have to grind my way through this, but people say they actually enjoy it. And the second compliment is I got to the end. So
Yeah.
I'm really happy with how it turned out. You're
So,
welcome.
Bob, can I call you Bob?
Please do.
Thank you, Bob. Okay, so let's start with your origin story. You're a cognitive neuroscientist. How did you end up in dreams? And what is cognitive neuroscientists? What do they do, and how do you end up in dreams?
Well, my origin story actually goes back much further because I have a PhD in biochemistry
Mm,
and did my doctoral research on DNA replication in bacteria. So it's been a long path to get me to where I am now. And a big chunk of that is cognitive neuroscience. Cognitive neuroscience is just a field that tries to um, investigate at a brain level how the mind works.
mhm,
And it's kind of tricky because the mind is ephemeral. We can't see it, we can't measure it, we don't know what it is in the brain that creates the mind, the conscious mind. And so it's all sort of tricky, playing around the edges and insinuating, oh, this must be related to the mind. And that has always fascinated me, going all the way back to high school. And how did I get into dreams? I think I sort of stumbled into it. I read some early papers by Alan Hobson
mhm.
where he argued that dreams are meaningless. And I thought, gee, this is a great big Harvard professor who doesn't seem to know his ass from a hole in the ground, if you'll forgive me, because dreams obviously do have meaning. And that's when I started paying attention to it. And then I actually ended up working with Hobson. And it's been 25, almost 30 years since I started looking at dreams.
Okay, before we move forward, I'm struck by something. Usually, creative people, and you know a lot about those, they sometimes able to transform particular knowledge, let's say from the mind and biochemistry, into a new field. Or did that happen to you, or was it more troubling to move from your neuroscience background into?
So, so when I got into cognitive neuroscience and started studying sleep and memory, um,
Mhm,
I think my background in biochemistry played an important role, not in a like direct way, but because in biochemistry you have standards of rigor and confidence that you usually don't have in cognitive fields. You sort of, in biochemistry, you expect a precision in your data that we frankly can't get in the cognitive neurosciences because measuring cognition is messy. But I tried to apply those more rigid standards to my research, and I think first of all that's what made it succeed in the world of cognitive neuroscientists, that they would look at a paper of mine and they start reading and they say, well, yeah, but what about this? And then they'd read the next paragraph and they say, oh, okay, you dealt with that. well, what about this? And then read the next paper and they say, oh, you dealt with that. So I really spent a lot of time excluding possible alternative explanations. And that comes from my biochemistry background. That didn't have to. It could have come from cognitive neuroscience, but I think cognitive neuroscientists, I was going to say, are a little sloppier, but they need to be sloppier because, if I study two test tubes, each of which have 1 million bacteria in them, they're going to act the same down to the third decimal point. If I ask 5 different people, what they think about the Super Bowl, I'm going to get 5 very different answers. So it's a sloppier field, and what I've tried to do is bring some of that rigor from my biochemical training into my research.
Yeah, exactly. Perhaps that's what I meant. I mean, maybe it's fair to say that I spoke also with people in dreams that the whole business of dreams, maybe when you started, Bob, was had this, should we call it sloppiness, or is it wasn't still established as a science. Some of them feel like this is not biochemistry, this is not mathematics, it's more like psychology, it's more like so that's what you starting from your story when when you say that you didn't like the answer that dreams don't mean anything. So that's the so now getting is that fair to say when you started dreams were the whole science of dreams were
When I studied, there was no science of dreams. I mean, it really felt like a bunch of researchers just talking about what they think is going on, but not really knowing how to study it. So, for example, if you want to do a classic scientific experiment, right, you use the scientific method. You change something and you look at the impact of that change. So this would be you change something and see how the dreams change. And people were convinced they couldn't do that. They weren't even trying to do that until our studies in 2000. No, not until 2010, probably.
really.
Um,
Mm.
yeah, I mean, it was just like, well, how do you manipulate a dream? How do you change the content of the dream? And the early work on that question, done by Freudian psychiatrists, psychologists back in the 1970s, were total flops. So they had college students watch movies, army movies of how to do a field amputation, where they were actually showing you amputations in the field. And they had these poor college students watching the film. And
Mm.
then at night, they would wake them up from REM sleep, where we knew we did the most intense dreaming, and ask for dream reports and look for incorporation. So could I change the content of this person's dream by having them watch these movies? And the answers were basically no. They had one person who said that they had a dream that they'd lost their wallet.
Mm.
And the researcher said, well, losing your wallet is like losing a part of yourself. It's like it's like an amputation, and you just roll your eyes at that. But that was the best they could do. And then they gave up trying. And they gave up trying really until Ken Paller where's Ken Paller? In Chicago at
Mm.
Northwestern University. And then myself with Adam Horowitz at MIT started to actually figure out ways to manipulate dream content.
Yeah, we're gonna get into your work and talk about it deeply. So perhaps that's the reason why, right, in some way, right, is the mystery of it, not being satisfied with the status quo. That's basically the curiosity behind every science discovery. Sometimes, right? So now,
Yes, but this is different because even as recently as 2000, a large fraction of the scientific community was insisting that you can't study dreams.
mm,
You can't study dreams because all you have are these, verbal reports from people who have the dreams. And you don't know if they made those up. I mean, either on purpose or because they were confused. So you've got nothing to study. So it wasn't even that there was an issue around how we studied it or what we found. There was a huge argument over whether it was even legitimate to try to study it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And you kind of maybe prove them wrong. So, shall we talk about the history of that? You track in your first few chapters of the book in a fascinating storytelling way, which I love. All of that business of how did it start, you refuse to say. I mean, most people attribute that to Freud, but you track them back, those ideas even further to say that maybe Freud himself wasn't that novel, his ideas, right? That's your phrasing. And can we talk about a little bit of the history of that until?
Sure. So in the 1800s, there began to be um, scientists who wanted to study dreams seriously. And they were often self studies and anecdotal. But for example, one researcher um, traveled a lot, and whenever he went to a new city, he would use a new cologne with a different smell
Mm,
and use it the whole time he was there. And then after all these trips, he had a servant. It was that time in history. He would go to sleep and he would tell the servant, after I've been asleep for an hour, spray some of this on me. One of them, don't pick one at random, spray it on me, and then 2 minutes later, wake me up.
mm,
And when he did this, he found that certainly at much better than p equals 0.05 at a very scientifically significant level, he would find that he was dreaming about the place
mm.
where he had used that particular cologne. So, in fact, 1850s, he's manipulating dream content in a very intentional way and showing that you can do that. Um, Other researchers were just starting to collect dream reports in much more, can I say, scientific ways instead of just having their own dream reports that they wrote down when they happened to remember one. Going out to larger groups of people and having them record them and then looking at what they had in common. And so there was a lot of evidence there, clearly, of what Freud came to label day residue,
Hmm.
which is that events and thoughts from the previous day get into your dream. And these people had, you know, demonstrated that 50 years before Freud came along and nailed it down. Um, Freud's views about the repression of, abusive memories um, was not one that had existed prior to him. It's not one that has existed since him, really, and was really a product of him living in a Victorian era that
Mm,
was so hyper focused on sexuality in a negative way. And so he came up with this model with very little evidence for it. And in fact, the model has never succeeded in collecting much evidence and is now largely discredited. But what Freud did is Freud said, you know, dreams aren't coming from the gods, dreams aren't random, dreams are the product of who you are in your subconscious. And that's what he brought to the field that was right
hmm.
and that has lasted ever since. But his cardinal theory about uh, childhood sexual abuse and repressed memories has found no support in research efforts.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember maybe you touch on this as well. Maybe if we go even further back, Gilgamesh, I'm not sure what is the relation there, but also Aristotle, I guess, was he the first to tell people like, look, if I am hearing a wind or something around me while I'm sleeping, how does it go into my dream, that sound or this activity? Therefore, dreams are not supernatural. Is that correct?
Right. So Gilgamesh, the which is the oldest recorded story in history from, I can't guarantee you, but I think around 4000 BC, has many dreams in it, and the dreams are all messages from the gods.
Hmm.
And in Greek times, that was the general conceptualization, that there were dreams from the gods. And so Aristotle became one of the first to say, no, these have a more naturalistic origin,
Hmm.
but they're very hard to nail down. So I don't know how much Aristotle's views, got taken up in general. I think until until Freud, there was still this general belief that dreams, might come from the gods. They might come from what you ate last night, um, but didn't really have a serious and useful and meaningful content.
Yeah. So then the science of dreams, maybe you can define for us what is a dream scientifically now, or we could start by when did that happen? Is it with the discovery of REM sleep? Uh, would you say?
REM sleep, so REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, is one of the stages of sleep. It comes up every 90 minutes or so during the night. And what was discovered in the 1950s is that we do most of our dreaming when we're in REM sleep. If you wake someone up from REM sleep, you've got an 80% chance of them saying, oh, I remember a dream. If you wake them up from other stages of sleep, it might be as low as 20 or 30% that they remember dreams. And so what that did for scientists is that it gave them the hope,
Hmm.
which has not been achieved yet, that they could find the physiological basis of dreaming, that there was something about REM sleep, about the physiology of that sleep state that caused us to dream. And so then it became sort of a valid scientific field because we had this physiological counterpart to dreaming.
Yeah. You do a fascinating retelling of all the models. Perhaps we don't have to go through them unless you can just recall them. Then we have the early explorers, you call them. Then we have activation synthesis, right?
Yes,
Which my understanding is that it just says all of that dreaming is just noise, basically garbage. It doesn't mean any.
that's yeah, yes and no. So the activation synthesis hypothesis, which Alan Hobson came up with in 1975, has two phases: activation and synthesis, hence its name. And what Hobson insists is that whereas Freud said that the origin of a dream, the inception of a dream, if you will, came from the reactivation of these traumatic memories, these repressed memories, Hobson argued that no, the initiation of a dream, the activation that produces that dream, is in fact random or chaotic activity in the brainstem. Uh, Activation that can have no content because it's too small an area to really produce visual images or feelings or thoughts. So that activation was random. Now, in his theory, he goes on to say that once you get this activation of some brain regions, like visual cortex, then the rest of the brain tries to figure out what that activation means. And to do that, it basically relies on memories and tries to construct some narrative from its own memories that might explain it. And in that way, the synthesis portion of that model actually argues that there is meaning and that it's not random. But Hobson was very much a contrarian, and the Freudians got so bent out of shape by his description of the activation component that he literally dropped the synthesis part and just spent the rest of his life talking about the activation part, which in fact is random.
Mm. Okay, uh, so now if could you define, like, when we say a dream scientifically, what is the definition? Is it a hallucination,
So,
a simulation? Uh,
so I will tell you that there was uh, a mini conference at the American Sleep Society meetings back in about, I'm guessing, 1995, where all of the big dream researchers got together to answer that question. What is the definition of a dream? And what they came up with, what they came away with, was a statement that says, we're never going to agree on this.
yeah, yeah.
So all we can do is urge people to write down the definition they're using.
Mm,
So some people would say, well, even a daydream counts as a dream. And others would say, so that was Ernest Hartman. Ernest Hartman said, even a daydream should count as a dream. And Alan Hobson says it has to occur in REM sleep or it's not really a dream. So there's all these definitions. So some people say it has to be highly visual, it has to be emotional, there has to be a narrative running through it, the dreamer has to be a character in it. All of those things have to come together for it to be a dream. And other people, myself included, say, you know what, I'm going to call any sleep mentation a dream. What does that
mm,
mean? That means anything that happens during your sleep that involves your mind, any thoughts, any feelings, any hallucinations, uh, all of that counts as dreaming. So we end up not having a consensus definition of dreaming because we don't have an origin story. We can't say, well, when these cells fire, then you dream.
mm.
And then we say, okay, so dream is what happens when those cells fire. We don't have those cells. We don't know what that is. So we're sort of working entirely from the level of self-report and perception. And so people are all over the place. It can be anything from what some of us refer to as sleep mentation, which would even include someone while they're asleep thinking, oh, am I dreaming? That would
Yeah.
be enough to call it a dream. Whereas other people want a full blown thing with rockets going off and fireworks and people running around and being afraid and doing things. So that whole range of possibilities, different people take as their definition of dreams. And usually to support their own personal model about how dreams are formed or what dreams mean.
So it's obviously very difficult to define that. This is even today, right? But this brings me to something before we talk why we
Wait, let me just
dream,
interrupt just for 1 second.
please.
It's hard to define rigorously, but it's sort of like defining happiness.
Mm,
You can do a quick definition of happiness, and then someone else will say, "Well, no, I think it has to include this feature," and someone else will say, "No, it doesn't have to include that feature, but it does have to include this feature." So you can have all these different micro definitions of happiness, but everybody knows what we're talking about when we're talking about happiness, and everybody knows what we're talking about when we talk about dreaming.
Is it because it's a little bit subjective? Let me read you something from your book I actually love. So if you, Bob, if your eyes, when you dream, are your eyes closed?
Yes,
So how then do you see your dreams if your eyes close?
right. That
I
was my co-author Tony harassing his nephew.
wow.
But that's part of it. When you're young, when you're very young, you believe that your dreams actually occurred, right?
Mm,
You saw something happen. It must have happened. We are built to believe all of our hallucinations. And so it's not surprising that it takes, individuals sometimes years to fully appreciate the fact that the dreams are just confabulations of the mind. It's just the brain and the mind making something up and displaying it so vividly that it looks and feels real.
yeah. I don't know if you like philosophy, maybe you don't, but it's really tempting to go, you know, how philosophers divided the whole universe into mind and matter. The famous joke goes by Bertrand Russell that what is matter, never mind, what is mind, never matter, or something like this.
It doesn't matter. Yeah.
It doesn't matter. But I want to read you something. I think, just take a second. I think you would enjoy this because I was working
Hmm.
on this project from Borges in a story that is called The Circular Ruins. It's about someone who dreams. It opens at some point with those lines. Just for fun, let's read them. It says, he understood that the task of molding the incoherent, dizzying stuff that dreams are made of is the most difficult work a man can undertake, even if he fathom all the enigmas of the higher and lower spheres, much more difficult than waving a rope of sand or minting coins of the fearless wind. He treats, I don't know if you, he treats dreams as the act of creation. That's like philosophy, maybe. Be, uh, any thoughts on that? I mean, you're a
Well,
scientist.
it sounds like he's also treating them as ephemerata. They're, there are these ephemeral things because creation, can produce the iPad,
Mm,
and that's a wonderful creation, but there's no mystery to it.
right.
Once it's created, everybody says, "Oh, what a clever idea! Why didn't I think of that?" Dreams and actually consciousness in general are things that we can't get our claws into. We can't figure out how to talk about them. I sometimes tell students to their amazement that there are no scientific studies that have demonstrated that humans are conscious.
Yeah, I've heard you say that.
All of our studies start with the assumption that we're conscious, since we know, I think, therefore I am. We know from personal experience that we're conscious, and then we assume that everybody else is, and then we go from there. But that initial claim that consciousness exists is a personal discovery, and the same thing is true for dreams. I mean, so I talk to people who don't dream or don't remember their dreams, who are very suspicious of the whole concept of whether dreams occur. So they're creative, they're valuable, but they're so mysterious that on some level we don't even know how to talk about it. So I'll give you an example. When people study, when people go looking for what causes consciousness in the brain, they developed a field known as the physiological correlates of consciousness. And of course, correlation is not causation. What they're after is causation, but they say, well, we can't even think of how to ask a question of causation, but we can study what goes with consciousness. So, in some famous studies, they showed that the lower visual areas are not necessary for consciousness and for conscious perception, that it's the higher visual areas that are used for conscious perception of visual imagery. And that sort of starts to give us a sense of how the brain constructs conscious images, but it doesn't touch the question of how did the brain become conscious and how does the brain dream. We know nothing, nothing at all about the answers to those questions. And so, and so we quietly accept that we don't know it. And then we go and see, well, what can we study, given that we can't get that foundational knowledge? So we can ask questions like, what is the usual content of dream like? How much do we see the incorporation of events from the day into a dream? How much do we see incorporation of events from 10 years ago in someone's life into their dreams? How much are the dreams, uh, do they seem to be about specific events, for example, in the day? And how much are they more general knowledge? So, for example, if you collect dreams from REM sleep and non REM sleep, you get subtle differences in how they look. So, you wake someone up from non-REM sleep and they say, "Oh, I was dreaming about flying saucers, and I think it's because we had pizza for dinner last night."
Mm.
So a very concrete episodic explanation of how that dream came to be. If you woke them up from REM sleep and they said, "Oh, I was dreaming about flying saucers," they might say, "Oh, it's because I love pizza."
Mm-hmm.
Right? Not some specific event, but some general knowledge that the person has. They love pizza, so maybe that caused them to dream about it. So you can tease apart in this way sort of what memory systems seem to be involved in creating dreams in REM sleep versus non-REM sleep. But again, we're not going after the basic question. The first question you asked, what is a dream? We're not going after that. How is a dream constructed? How does the brain create a dream? We're not talking about that because we are not sure we even know how to ask the questions.
Yeah, I would love to go to all of those points, which you actually give great answers to all of those, the associations that dreams make, and the new knowledge. All of that is fascinating. But just before we jump there, so you brought Descartes. I actually was thinking about him. I think in his dream meditation, maybe it's like a thought experiment. He just, my understanding is that he doubted everything, and then he had to come up with some what do you call it,
Concrete, concrete evidence.
yeah,
Yeah.
something to stand on. I forgot the word, postulate or
Oh,
something. And
yeah.
then exactly, so then he thought, well, if I'm doubting, that's the one thing I could be sure of, which started his first principle of his and it's strange and funny that it came from a dream, that he was like, what if I am in a dream, what if I doubt my hands and reality and all of that. So uh, now I want to go, if you feel this is the, I guess, the next step here from your chapter 7, why we dream. You propose like uh, many answers to that. How does the brain create a dream, or that one question, what foundations does dreaming serve,
What
why do
functions? What functions?
what functions, and why do we have to experience the dream for this function to be fulfilled. And you say, I love this, you say the short answer is not sure for the first, and the second is not sure, and the third is not sure. So you're doing the Descartes move, but let's talk about why do we dream? That's a big question, I guess.
Right. So there are two meanings to that question. We can be asking mechanistically, why do we dream in terms of what is the brain doing that causes us to dream?
Mhm.
And that one we still are completely in the dark on. The second one, though, which is why do we dream? What function does it serve? And this has been the bugaboo of the field, since Freud and maybe going back, even thousands of years when people try to explain, well, we have dreams because the gods are trying to give us messages.
Mhm.
That theory held sway for a couple of thousand years
Mhm.
and really remained an important theory until Freud came along. And Freud said, well, no, it's our subconscious mind processing events from our life. And then there's been, multiple models for how that works in terms of how the brain picks the topic. So one recent person said that it was for dealing with trauma. It's really for dealing with traumas in your life. Um, and someone else says, something completely the opposite. And I think where we've landed, Tony and I, is that it's for processing what I would call incomplete memories, memories for events that haven't settled out in our mind. Think about think about what goes through your mind as you're falling asleep at night. When you fall asleep at night, you never think about, oh, I wonder how much change I have in my pocket.
Mhm.
You never try to remember someone's phone number. You think about things that happened during the day, that you're unhappy about how they went, that you trying to figure out how they could have gone differently. It might be something someone said that you're not sure you understood what it means. You told them you were doing this interview and they laughed and they said, good luck. And you're not sure whether they meant good luck in that sort of positive, affirming way, or if they were saying, yeah, good luck, in that sort of negative sense of, I doubt that you can do it. And so you lie in bed and you try to figure out which of those did they mean? Or what do I have to do tomorrow? And oh my God, I have to get this paper done tomorrow. And how am I going to get it done? So your brain is basically in this sleep onset period drawing up a list of all the things that it needs to deal with during the night. It needs during the night to try to find answers for these questions. What did she mean when she said that? How am I going to get through this interview tomorrow? Things,
That's what I
what am
was
I going to
thinking
do?
yesterday.
Yes, that's right. And your brain goes looking for answers. And when we dream, what the brain is doing is it's looking for answers in places that we would not normally look. So technically what we say is the brain looks for weak associations to the topic. So if the question is, how am I going to get through this interview tomorrow? You might have your brain remember something that happened to you in third grade when your teacher said to you, well, you better have an answer for this tomorrow. And that's the whole memory you have. But your brain says, boy, that feels like it's similar to the question you're dealing with in your life now. And what your brain does then is it creates a narrative story around that third grade event to see if it can find ways that it fits in with your current concern, your interview tomorrow. And it creates this story. And in the book, we create this rule. And the rule was, if the dream evokes emotions in the dreamer,
Right.
then it's probably relevant and it's probably useful. So what the brain is doing is it's creating these scenarios and looking at how you react. I mean, you could think of this as what actually happens in a really good interview. They ask you questions, and as much as they're looking at your answers, they're looking at your body and your face and how you respond, because that tells you a lot more about what's going on in the person. So the dream is doing that. And if it decides that this is valuable, potentially valuable, it will actually strengthen the physical connections in the brain between that memory and the memory of the interview you have to do tomorrow. So that when you wake up in the morning, even if you didn't remember the dream, you wake up and you're thinking about the interview and you laugh and you say, wow, this is just like third grade all over again. And it puts it in a perspective, because you realize that it wasn't a big deal in third grade. And maybe this isn't such a big deal as you think it was. In third grade, you thought that was a big deal. Maybe it's not such a big deal. And so that's what the brain is going for. It's going for these associations that give you possible new insights into concerns in your life. Why do we have to experience it as a dream? You know, the brain is processing memories all night long. We've done studies, for 25 years where we trained someone on something as ridiculous as typing 41324, or as complex as trying to discover patterns in large data sets. And we find that after they sleep, they've got the answer. You're a musician, so you might have that experience of, you're sitting at your piano and you're trying to get a certain riff down right. And you just can't get it right. And you finally give up and you go to bed and you get up the next morning and you've got it perfect the first time through. And that's because we know now that your brain is actually improving your memory of how to perform that
During sleep.
while you sleep, during sleep. And all of this is happening outside of conscious awareness in your dream, in your sleep. So why in this one particular case do we have to be conscious? And the best answer we have comes from Antonio Damasio, who was in Iowa when he wrote his book, The Feeling of What Happens. And his hypothesis is that you cannot construct a narrative. You cannot construct a story unless you actually play it out in your mind. You can't do it in the background. You can't have, when you step off a curb, your brain notices it and calculates exactly how to adjust your steps so you land comfortably on the road and down from the sidewalk. And you don't have to think about that. You don't have to even be aware that your brain's doing that. But if you want to create a story, then you need to do it within consciousness. And so if the brain is trying to create these narratives during sleep to allow it to determine whether this older memory is possibly useful in a current situation, then it has to do it in consciousness so it can create that narrative. And so that's the answer to the question of, do we actually have to dream? And the answer is yes. We have to consciously dream, because that's the only way the brain knows how to create a narrative.
Yeah, that's a lot there, you said. Just to recap, so there's something here in the book, just to recap the functionality, you say one of the answers is the function of dreams and the REM sleep are one and the same. Of course, you examine that, you're skeptical of that. Then dreams help us solve problems. That's also, you examine all of those, but that's another
Mm-hmm.
something that there's some consensus people agree on. Then three, dream have an evolutionary function. Four, dream play a role in emotional regulation. And five, dreams have no adaptive or biological function at all, which we spoke about.
Mm-hmm.
And six, dreams have a memory function, which you actually go very deep. So you examine all of those. And I remember reading you were saying perhaps it's all of those at once and in a way.
And I do believe that. I mean, I like to tell the story of overhearing two tongue researchers who researched the tongue. And what
Mm,
is saying the function of the tongue is to taste food. And the other saying, no, no, no. The function of the tongue is to articulate speech.
mm,
And if you were to hear this conversation, you would think they were nuts,
mm.
right? You want to say, come on, guys. The tongue does both of those things. But but in dream research, we tend to get siloed into our own belief. We say, no, no, no. It's about processing trauma. And
Mm.
someone says, no, no, it's for processing all emotions. And someone else says, no, it's for creativity. And the answer is yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
The dreams are doing all those things that you listed, except the one that comes from Hobson, that it has no function at all. All of those, I think, are true.
I love how you hold all of those ideas at once. That must be difficult, but I guess that's reflects the complexity of the world we live in, right? I mean,
Yeah,
I can add always maybe mouse or lips are just to put lipsticks on them. One could say something surreal as that, and then
that's right.
to hold
Oh, I
all of
forgot. Tongues are to grab food from a distance,
yeah.
right? That's what frogs do. They shoot their tongue out and they catch a fly. That's the function of the tongue. I mean,
Yeah, or could be just aesthetics and so on and so forth. So there's complexity. So you I love how you and Antonio go through all of the history of every possibility, examine that and tell us about it. So uh so what I was going to say here. Yeah, the one game maybe you can tell us about it. What is it? It's the Tertes game. You also did this experiment to
Tetris.
the Tetris. I never know how
Yeah.
to pronounce it. So that was a to taste to test how memory absolutely improved during sleep and learning, and that is
So that,
very.
go on.
No, I was saying is that are we sure of that the
So that, so I mentioned early attempts to manipulate dream content that seemed to fail. Um, The Tetris study was the first one in 2000 that clearly demonstrated that we could influence the content of dreams. And the real secret was to not look late in the night during REM sleep, but to look at dreaming during the very first few minutes of the night. And what we found very simply is that if we had subjects play Tetris, which is a computer game, have them play it for an hour and a half before they went to bed, and then we woke them up multiple times in the next 45 minutes or so, on numerous occasions, they would report that they were dreaming about playing Tetris. They would report seeing the pieces falling down. They might see the pieces fitting together. They might see lines of pieces disappearing from the screen. They might hear the music from the game. And so it was clear that by having them play the game, we were altering the content of their dream. And that got us the first paper on dreams to be published in the journal Science, which is the top U.S. journal for all of science. The first one in almost 50 years. And it's because studying dreaming suddenly became a science.
Yeah.
You could manipulate something and alter the content of the dream. And then you can start asking questions. Well, okay, when can we have them play Tetris and see this effect? What if they play Tetris in the morning? Okay, will they dream about it the next night too? We can ask all of these rather banal questions that scientists love to ask that will help us shape our understanding of how the brain chooses information to incorporate into a dream. And that was
Is that not the same as lucid dreaming, or are you?
in lucid dreams. So lucid dreaming is being aware of the fact that you're dreaming while you dream. And while you're in a lucid state dreaming, you can manipulate the content of the dream. So you can decide, okay, I'm going to try to walk through that wall. Let's see if I can walk through that wall. And you might be successful or you might not. So that's manipulating the dream content from within the dream. And a researcher sort of has no control over that. So what I want to do is I want to be able to take people and put them into two groups. You guys are going to play Tetris. You guys are not going to play Tetris. Okay, we're going to collect dream reports from both groups. We're going to give those dream reports to people who don't know which group they're coming from to score whether they include references to Tetris. And then we can ask whether our manipulations as a scientist. This is the exact same thing as when you were in third grade and you learned about taking the bean plant and you put some of them in the closet and you put some of them in the window, and the ones in the window grew these lush green plants and the ones in the closet grew these long, almost white leaves. And you can say, oh, okay, so by manipulating the access to light, we can change how the bean plant grows, and that tells us something about the function of light for bean plants. And similarly, we can start to examine what's important for a dream, what leads to the construction of a particular dream. And then, just 4 years ago, a student of mine, Adam Horowitz, decided he wanted to look at creativity. And he wanted to look at this incorporation of things that happen before you go to sleep into those, what we call hypnagogic dreams, dreams that happen just at the start of the night.
Yeah,
and so he came up. So he did this profoundly trivial experimental design. He divided people into two groups. One group, he said, okay, I want you to take a nap, and as you're falling asleep, pay attention to your thoughts. And then after they fell asleep, he would wake them up, collect a dream report if they had one, tell them to go back to sleep, remember, think about your thoughts. wake them up again, and in a 90-minute nap in the afternoon, he might get a half dozen reports out of them. The other group, he said, okay, as you're falling asleep, think about a tree. That was the entire instruction. Think about a tree. And then he let them fall asleep, and after a few minutes, he'd wake them up. And if they had a dream, they'd report the dream content. And it turned out that 72% of the times that he woke them up, they would report dreaming about a tree. And the reporting dreaming about a tree in a very concrete way. They weren't talking about, oh, I had this dream about things just blossoming in the universe or something. They were seeing trees. They might be saying, oh, I was looking at my fingers and there were branches of a tree. But it was always about a tree. So it turns out, A, that it's very easy to get people to dream about almost anything. I mean, even something as banal as trees, he can get 72% incorporation. But what was cooler than that is that after this 90-minute period of repetitive awakenings, he would get them fully awake now. And then he would give them 3 different classic tests of creativity. In this case, tailoring each of them to trees. So one would be write a creative short story, like a page long, about trees. And the second one was tell me all the unusual creative uses for a tree that you might come up with. And my favorite was someone said, oh, could be a toothpick for a giant. And the third was, I'm going to give you a bunch of nouns and you tell me the first verb that comes to your mind. So they might say tree, and someone would say grow, and branch, and break, and limb, and flower. And so he'd collect all of their responses to these different nouns. And then again, he would have raters who don't know which group the answers are coming from, whether it was the people who were just told to think about their thoughts or the ones who were told to think about trees. And on all 3 of those tests, people who were told to think about trees as they fell asleep were more creative. And in fact, when you just look at the group who were thinking about trees, the more times they referenced trees in their dream reports, the more creative they were. So this was probably the first experimental demonstration that asking people to dream about something could lead to them dreaming about it, and dreaming about it led to increased creativity.
That's fascinating. So I wanted to go into that. So are you saying this is the hypnagogia only or in general?
This has only been carefully looked at in hypnagogia. Adam had one of his fellow students did a few dream reports from REM sleep, where they would wake someone up from REM sleep and tell them to think about a tree and have them go back to sleep. And it seemed to work there too, but they didn't have enough people in that, didn't have enough people in that arm of the experiment that they can really conclude anything. But the odds are that that's happening all through the night. And the type of creativity might vary. I talked about how the content of dream might be more about explicit memories from your recent past. If you're in non-REM sleepers, they could be about more general knowledge, if you will, if you were in REM sleep. And so the kind of creativity you see might vary. But people have used this technique, it turns out, in the past. Thomas Edison.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. So,
Yeah.
I mean, is it the Thomas Edison famous story and the benzamine, what was it, the chemical
Benzene ring.
the benzene ring, and the what else, the story about the snake,
Swallowing its tail. That
yeah.
was the benzene ring.
do,
But
do do you buy those, like you say, I guess that I'm trying to think about this. It's really interesting because can we like generalize, say yes, there's a way to increase your creativity, or but maybe you're more careful about this. This doesn't guarantee to happen. It's just we have. So, what do you think, Bob?
So there's two very different ways we can talk about it. We have pretty clear evidence that 3 Nobel Prizes in the sciences were based on, I almost used the word revelation, on dreams that the scientist had, that they woke up from and said, oh my God, that's how, that explains what I've been trying to figure out. So the periodic chart of the elements, that came in a dream. The discovery of chemical transmission of information between nerve cells. The experiment to prove that actually came to someone in a dream. And in fact, the story is that he was so excited he got up and he wrote it down on a napkin. And in the morning he couldn't read it. And so the next night he actually had the dream again and went right into the laboratory at 2 a.m. and did the experiment. But those two and the discovery of the benzene ring are all pretty well accepted as the products of hypnagogic dreams. Those are the exception. I don't think that you're going to go to sleep tonight and dream of something that'll win you a Nobel Prize or win you a Grammy or win you, some music award. Although people like John Lennon have talked about songs of theirs that they essentially wrote.
Paul McCartney, yeah, right.
Yeah, McCartney in dreams. So, but those are those are the flashy ones. But all of us dream, and all of us know the concept of sleeping on a problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
But also, your model, which we haven't gotten. I maybe let's define it. Maybe explains those things in terms of possibilities, or if I'm right, the weak associations. So the shape of the snake was one of those associations that he couldn't think about. Can you
Yeah.
elaborate on
I
that?
mean, I think that's a beautiful example, and then I'll define the NEXTUP model in some detail. But the discovery of the ring shape of the benzene molecule, that it's 6 carbon rings that are joined to each other in a circle, in a ring, came from a dream in which I'm blanking on his name, but the German researcher,
Calicule. I mean, his name
right?
is
Yeah, Koikale,
Calcule.
uh, um, that he dreamt of a snake swallowing its tail,
Yeah,
which comes from,
you
yeah,
quote him. He goes like, "But look, what was that? One of the snakes had seized hold of its own tail, etc., etc." So
yeah, seized
he
hold, yeah,
reported that.
yeah, and then he wakes up and he says, "Oh my God, that's the benzene ring. It's a circle." So again, and there's some, the snake swallowing its tail is a sort of a mythical image from, I think, more than one tradition. Um, and the brain's dealing with this problem of what's the structure of the benzene ring? What's this, and it comes up with this weak association
Wow, that's
to
fascinating.
a
Yeah.
memory of something that has a strange structure, right? It's a snake, but it has no beginning and it has no end. And the brain finds this memory, plays it out in the dream, thinking maybe that's relevant.
Wow,
So
that's fascinating. He didn't see, just to be clear, you say that he didn't see any chemicals, any clear
no
answer. He just
chemicals, no.
saw the shape and he made the connection. But where that shape came
Well,
from is the explanation.
yeah, I
The
would
weak.
argue that the brain made that connection as it created the dream, but
Mhm.
that was not a conscious connection in the mind. It wasn't until he woke up and remembered the dream that he realized that it was about the benzene ring. So that's sort of how it works. You
Hmm.
don't just, it doesn't flash up on the screen, Bob. If you put the car in your neighbor's driveway, then you won't have the problem. It doesn't do something explicit like that.
Yeah.
It shows you something. I mean, next up is the name of the model that Tony and I came up with, and it stands for network exploration to understand possibilities.
Yeah, that's a great acronym. Yeah. Network
Not,
exploration to understand possibilities. Next up.
yeah, not to find answers. That's
Okay.
not what you do while you're asleep. You do that when you're awake. It finds possibilities. It's sort of like the therapist who says, well, you know, what about this idea?
Mm.
You've been talking a lot about, how all these women you meet turn out to be, you know, crummy people.
Mhm.
Maybe it's not all those women that the problem is. And a good therapist doesn't then give you the answer,
Mm.
right? She sets up the possibility. Maybe we should look elsewhere
Mm.
for this source of this problem, and then leaves it for the client to find the answer. And it's unclear with people like Edison whether they actually saw the answers to their problems. So we haven't mentioned Edison. Thomas Edison had a chair that he would sit in, an armchair,
Mm.
with a metal plate on the floor next to it. And he would sit in it holding a spoon between two fingers over the plate.
Or a
And
metal
he would,
metal bowl. So the story from the way I know it is the metal bowl. I made video about it, but you know more than me.
we don't have really solid knowledge of what it was. Let's
Uh,
call it a bowl, a metal bowl. And then he would think about this problem he was having. He's trying to invent something, and he's hit a roadblock, and he would just lie there
mhm.
and think about the problem. And he would slowly fall asleep. And when he fell asleep, the muscles in his hand would relax. The spoon would fall. It would hit the bowl. It would wake him up, and he would have his answer.
Mhm.
And Salvador Dali actually wrote somewhat extensively about this same concept. And he says, the inspiration, the new knowledge develops in the quarter second it takes the spoon to fall from my fingers to the floor, because I didn't have the answer
Mm.
before I fell asleep. And yet a quarter second later, I wake up and I have the image of what it is I want to paint.
By the way,
And
Bob,
so,
did you go? Sorry to interrupt you. Did you ever go to the Museum of Dali in Florida? I think you would
no,
love that.
I'm sure I would love it. I actually have Dali's illustrated version of Alice in Wonderland.
Oh, really?
And yeah, and we've got several of the prints up on walls. And it's phenomenal. I mean, you could just see that his mind. Well, someone once asked Dali if he took drugs, and he said, "Take drugs? I am drugs."
Mm.
You know, and that's the space he lived in, with his brain living in this hyper associative space, right, where he came up with images like like clocks that are bent in half. Um,
Yeah.
so so those images can be creatively discovered in sleep. Answers to mechanical problems can be creatively discovered in that space of sleep. And so, our next up model basically says that when you fall asleep and start to dream, what the brain is doing is it's looking for weakly associated memories. It's going through networks of associated memories, looking for something that has some features in common with the concern that you're currently dealing with.
That's fascinating. But how did you guys find out that? And also, is the brain doing this whether you're working on a problem or not, or is it something more intentional that Edison
Well,
would set up and then go and dally in.
yeah, but they set it up, but then the brain just does it. I mean, I don't think the brain says, okay, let's solve Edison's problem now.
Mm,
It just goes out on associative networks and brings them back and gives him his answer. It's a magical process in some ways and a trivial process in others. I mean, the brain is going through a network. It's running across dozens, hundreds, thousands of memories. And as it passes through them, either it finds some sort of connection to the concern that the person is dealing with, or it doesn't. And if it does, then it brings it into the dream. I think the human brain does this 24/7. My wife and I talk about the brain snipping.
mm,
Snipping is sustained, non intentional processing. This is what we know, you can't remember someone's name. And then you go off and you're in the middle of doing something else.
mm,
And all of a sudden say, oh, Sylvia, her name is Sylvia.
mm,
And it's not that you knew you were looking for it. It's just that your brain, while you're doing other things, has this unsolved problem that it continues to work on it. And it works on them during the day and it works on them during the night. And we used to call it, initially it was going to be called non-conscious processing, but we realized that we do a lot of it consciously without even knowing that we're doing it. You're going along in your day and you suddenly realize, oh God, I'm fixating on that problem again.
mm.
It's not what you're doing in the foreground, but your brain is processing information all the time. The biggest problem that the human brain has, maybe the biggest problem that the human being has, is to make sense out of what happens in their lives, to take the events of their day and figure out how to file them away, where to throw them out. We probably forget 90% of the things that we initially encode during the day. I'm walking to the grocery store, I pass a tree, I notice a flower on it, I cross the street, I noticed a car that I had to stop and wait for. But the next day, all those memories are gone. But they're gone because the brain decided not to keep them.
Mm.
And so the brain is constantly trying to make meaning out of what happens in our life. And it does that while we're awake, and it does it while we're asleep. And asleep, when we're dreaming, it does it in a particular way that it can't do during the day, which is to really just look at these very weakly associated memories that we never think of when we're awake to help us understand the problem.
So yeah, that's actually fascinating. So it seems like the possibilities and the association, those connection is very important in your model. It almost explains everything. But I want to stay just a moment on emotions. Speaking
Yes.
about meaning, I think you adapt. What was his name? Damasio.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there's a fascinating example on how perhaps only through emotions we grab or understand the meaning of basically anything. You go through example of a woman who what was it, she never experienced she was playing a
Fear.
game. Fear.
She
Okay.
couldn't experience fear.
Yeah, so
So there's a game that his wife actually developed called the gambling task, where you've got four decks of cards and you have to pick cards from them one at a time. You can choose which desk to take them from. And you turn them over and it either says you've won some money or you've lost some money.
mm,
And two of the decks, it turns out, overall will lead to you gaining money, and two lead to you losing money. And as you play more and more cards, as you're trying to figure out how this works, Damasio shows that your brain, your emotions figure it out before you do. So it finds that, a certain time after you've played a certain number of cards, you take a card from one deck and go to turn it over, and you get a rush of activity in the amygdala, which basically says, don't do it.
Mm.
But you still do it because you don't know. And it might be 20 or 30 cards later that you finally say, okay, so these two decks are good and these two aren't. But before you consciously figure that out, your brain emotionally has already done it. And if it turns out that you have this condition known as calcified amygdalas, where the amygdalas don't work. So this woman who can't experience fear, she never figures it out. When you play it and when you figure it out, you think you're doing a very rational calculation. But in fact, it's an emotional calculation. And arguably all the decisions we make in the end are emotional. So even if you're doing a jigsaw puzzle, right? And you find where a piece fits and you say, it fits there. There's sort of this emotional rush that arguably even precedes your confirming that it fits visually. That all of our decisions basically have an emotional component to them.
So even what you're saying is even a solid, rational decision, it must feel to to the person who took it. It must feel something. Therefore, it ultimately translates into emotions. That was a good, rational decision. Therefore, it feels something, and this is how we know it. Am I?
That's right. That's right. And that's why his book is called The Feeling of Knowing. Um, Something as simple as adding up a column of numbers as you add in your mind, as you add each new number. I mean, you should do it. Write down that little list of 10 one-digit numbers and sum them up. And you'll notice that each time you add a new one, there's this, yes, that's right. Okay, I got that right. There's this emotional satisfaction, it might feel like, that you can go on to the next one. So I can't think of anything less emotional than adding up a column of random digits. But even there, we're using our emotion to say, oh, wait, was that right?
Yeah.
Wait a minute, I'm not, right? So yes, and so as we're dreaming, that's what the brain is looking at. It's looking for some sort of emotional response in the dream. Where the dream is either saying no, or yes, yes. But either way, it's saying that this is connected, not just emotionally, but logically, to this current concern that the brain is trying to help understand.
Yeah, there's one notion that fascinates me. You speak about new knowledge. I highlighted it. I can't find it. Where is it? But basically, you're saying that dreams access through those weak associations, they come up with a new knowledge essentially, which is really incredible.
Right?
Is that the
It's,
case?
yes, it is putting things together in a way that allow. I mean, whenever you say "aha,"
Mm.
we're talking about new knowledge, about seeing a new relationship that we didn't know existed beforehand.
Yeah, Bob, a long time ago, or many people define creativity. I would like to hear what's creativity for you. There is one definition of it is basically coming up with new associations, like or new connections between things. And I don't know, one famous example, just combining space and time in the case of Einstein. How could you put those two things together? Or matter and energy coming up with E equals mc squared, or perhaps simple stuff. The example we just spoke about the snake. So the brain is doing this, and it's not giving us the here's the answer. It's just it's looking for those shapes, for those you call them the weak associations, right?
Well,
And
that's what it's doing when we're dreaming, but it's also processing memories the rest of the night. So I can have someone type 41324 over and over and over as fast and as accurately as they can, and until they plateau, and then the next morning they'll be faster. Or I can ask them to try to figure out how various cards in a deck relate to the weather in this weather prediction task, um, and they're better at it the next morning. And what I tell people is when they wake up in the morning, they have a better understanding of how the world works than when they went to bed the night before. And that's what dreaming is trying to do. It's not trying to answer the question for you. It's just trying to give you a better understanding.
basically helping you to survive, or
Yeah. Or to flourish. Not just to survive, but to flourish, to reach the heights that we hope to reach.
yeah. So there's we can talk about insomnia, the bizarreness of sleeps. Would you tell us a little bit about the bizarreness? Why are sleep dreams so bizarre? Like yesterday, I just saw something out of nowhere. I have no idea what was that, and I and I woke up like laughing. No idea. Something just out of nowhere. It doesn't mean anything. It's not associated with anything. It made me remember. I mean, it made me remember what I've been reading in your book, the bizarre ideas of you. You explained them, right? Your model explained this bizarreness, and that I could turn in my dream into someone else, but I cannot turn into something else. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. So there are so dreams are bizarre, hands down. And Alan Hobson sort of categorized bizarrenesses, and one of them was bizarre transformations, where one thing turns into another. And at first, you think that these are totally random, right? Like there's this fire engine, and it turns into a clown car. Um, and you say that's totally random. But a fire engine would never turn into a fireman, right? It won't turn into something that's a completely different category. When something is transformed in your dream, it turns out that it stays within category and it stays within physical category. So a ATM machine turns into a video game in one,
Mm.
or a swimming pool turns into a lake.
But
I mean,
that's because how the brain is filing things inside the memory, right?
yeah, yeah, and it might be a limit on what it can do. I mean, people do these experiments. Lucid dreamers do these experiments. So one experiment was, okay, here I am. I've suddenly realized that I'm dreaming, and I'm in my bedroom. Uh, can I make myself be in Paris?
Mhm.
Now, if you've been to Paris, you can probably close your eyes and imagine Paris and sort of imagine you there. So you would think that this dreamer in their bedroom could do that. It could suddenly put themselves into Paris, but they can't. One of the rules of how dreams are constructed says you can't do that. But if they walk out a door, they can turn out to be in Paris on the other side of the door.
That's so
If
interesting.
they're outside and they walk around a corner, they can be in Paris. Or if they simply stand in place and spin around 5 times and stop, they can be in Paris. So the answer is that if the brain is forced to create a new visual environment because you've gone through a door, you've gone around the corner, or you've spun around and stopped, then it can create an image of Paris. But there are these rules that
That's what you.
bind it.
That's fascinating. I guess that's. I thought about this, but then I was reading you call it maybe the logic of dreams. Some
Hmm.
things are impossible as you just described, and even a dream for most of us is just, surreal. Anything could happen, but it turns out that's not the case. Why is that? Is there, this is how the brain works and file things, and it needs.
In that particular example I gave you, my guess would be, and it's truly just a guess, is that the brain, before it can draw a new picture on your mind using cells in the visual cortex that are used to represent visual images, it has to wipe the slate clean. It can't overwrite an existing image.
Mm,
It has to somehow blank the slate. And those methods I described are methods that will blank the slate, because when you go around the corner, there's no presupposition of what's going to be there. When you go through the door, there's no image waiting to appear. So that's when you can create your own bizarreness, if you will, in a dream. But the bizarreness is part of the process. Normally, if you're not lucid, it's part of the process of searching through these weak associations.
mm,
And you had a dream last night that you're willing to swear was not relevant to anything going on in your life.
yeah.
And so I want to say two things about that. First of all, much of the time that the dream is creating these useful associations, it won't be obvious to the dreamers that they're useful. They'll just sort of lurk in the background. But I also like to say that dreaming might be a little bit like being a venture capitalist.
You don't
You know,
think it's
venture.
still you don't think it's random. Maybe I haven't
Oh,
figured out what is the association, but there must be something, right?
there is something that caused your brain to have that dream, and it was not random. But it might be. It might be. So I sometimes say the dreaming brain is like a venture capitalist. Venture capitalists don't expect all of their investments to pay off.
Hmm.
In fact, if they all pay off, they're not a venture capitalist. Venture capitalists want 1 in 10 of their investments to pay off, but to pay off so big that it more than covers the loss of the other 9. So it might be that your brain pulled up something for a dream last night, and its answer was nope. That's not going to help us. And it was in the end not useful and not obviously connected to anything. And that's fine with the brain because it doesn't need every single dream, to hit a jackpot.
Mm. You also make the point that most of those we don't even remember. That's why studying that is a difficult thing, right? So yesterday I was thinking about reading your book and thinking about the structure of the interview. And then maybe I had some dreams, but I had some, the one I mentioned, I don't even remember. It was just a location that had, it came out of nowhere. It has nothing to deal with your work, with your book, with this interview. But I'm learning that maybe just like the examples we discussed, there must be some connection my brain is making about the connection between your ideas, what that took other shape, and maybe it took a shape of a location or a shape of a color, right? Am I understanding this?
Yeah, yeah. It, the dream is, first of all, so you commented that many dreams are not remembered. The vast majority of our dreams are not remembered. It's pretty clear that we're dreaming probably a minimum of 4 hours out of an 8-hour night.
Hmm.
And the number actually might be closer to 6 or closer to even 8. We can only remember a dream when we wake up. We can only remember the dream that we were sort of in the midst of when we woke up. So when people come to me and say, how come I never remember dreams? I tell them, well, it's because you fall asleep fast, you don't wake up during the night, and in the morning you wake up with an alarm clock. And so you never have a chance to remember dreams. It's not that you're not having them. So, yeah, if dreams are going to serve a biological function, it can't require that we remember the dream for it to serve that function. So what we would say is if a dream, if the brain constructs a dream based on some remote associate to a current concern and decides that it's potentially useful, it will, in the moment, in the dream basically, strengthen the synaptic connections along the path that lead from that waking concern from the day before, say, and this recalled memory. And that happens right then and there, and you don't ever have to remember it for it to be available to you the next day to help you deal with this issue.
Right. So you talk about harnessing creativity. Can you tell me about this and how serious you take this?
Um, I think that the use of sleep onset prompting, what we call dream incubation,
Mm-hmm.
is a really potentially really valuable tool for increasing our creativity, dramatically increasing our creativity. And it can be increasing our creativity in terms of what we think of as really creative, really taking two ideas that were in our mind and putting them together in a novel way that sort of explosively advances our knowledge. But it can also be a creativity in terms of like, I realized that I know two ways to tie my shoes. This is going to be really nerdy, but I can tie it by making a loop and going around it with the other, what do you call them? The other thread of your shoelace and poking it through there and then making the knot. Or you can make a loop in each of the two and then tie an overhand knot. And they both have the same effect. Now, that was a creative insight for me, and I cannot manage to get bent out of shape about it.
I love
You know,
that.
we have these creative insights about, oh, I should probably put that pan on and let it warm up before I even take the hamburger out of the refrigerator. Otherwise, I'm going to be sitting around waiting for the pan to warm up.
Mm.
A creative insight that can be useful. It could save you seconds. I mean, I'm just saying that this process can result in very simple, banal discoveries of new information. But arguably, all the major discoveries that happen, that are made in our world,
Yeah, and here
come
just
from this. Yeah.
sorry. So here, just to be clear, I guess no one is expecting. We're not talking about dreaming and suddenly having a magical equation or some novel solution to something out of nowhere. It's again, it's going to come as a insight in a different shape, in a different form. That requires the dreamer who's seeking that to be obsessed essentially with the he's looking for the answers, he's learning about it, right? So that's the initial setup, and then you go into like 8 steps into that. You advise people to go to sleep, ask themselves what the problem, or state the problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
So
let's take a
remember,
fun example. You throw
good,
one.
good, good.
Maybe we're looking for a name of a novel or
Yes.
whatever. And I'm a writer. I can't come up with a creative name. It's about dreams, let's say, but everything, and yeah. So how would you advise me to?
Well, I would tell you, take the take. I'm laughing because I've asked people who speak different languages if they have expressions similar to sleeping on a problem.
Mm,
And it turns out in France, they talk about taking a problem to bed. And I laugh that this describes the difference in our cultures. In the US, we sleep on a problem.
sleep on it.
In France, they take the problem to bed with them.
Yeah.
So I would say you want to just hold that question in your mind as you're falling asleep. And then set your phone to wake you up in 5 minutes. And do that repetitively for maybe half an hour. And I would argue you're likely to come up with one very clever title, one very stupid title, and two completely ridiculous and outrageous titles, right?
Yeah.
And amongst those might be the title you want, or something close enough that you can grab the title you want.
So it's stating the problem, going to sleep, repeating the problem, and you advise people to have a little bit of a notebook, so because you forget immediately those
Right, yes.
those creative associations, and then you might. So basically, this is what Edison was doing.
That's right.
We're dealing with the hypnagogic state, right? This is
Yes.
not REM sleep. Not it's
This
just
is not REM. That's right.
those short.
Just the hypnagogic sleep onset state. And offline, I can get for you a website for a free app that will do it for you.
Yeah.
It'll ask you, I think, to record your prompt, and then it will prompt you with that. Wait 5 or 10 minutes, wake you up, record on the phone your dream report, remind you of the prompt, think about a title for your book, and do this over and over.
I'll reach out to you again, but thank you so much. I really appreciate and thank you for your work. It's a fascinating book. I really enjoyed it a lot. And talk about the book, yeah. When Brains Dream. This came out 2020?
I think so, before the pandemic, yeah.
Yeah, it's fabulous book. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm gonna yeah, I mean, look, some people say that one of the compliments for an author when you just write all over the book and make a lots of notes. And is that true? I mean,
That's definitely true.
Yeah, like I'm even like drawing snakes here and there, and yeah, Bob, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Pleasure to
it's
talk
wonderful
to you.
talking with you. Okay.
Have
Bye-bye.
a great day. Thank you.
We are a way for the cosmos to know itself.
This is Parallax. Conversations and interviews by me, Yazan. I talk with academics, scientists, thinkers, and all creatives, and I'm here to listen, ask questions, and learn from their insights.
Drawn by the music of cosmic harmonies, it can take us anywhere in space and time.
To better understand how the world works.